Good afternoon. I'm Pastor Jeff Edwards from the Parsippany United Methodist Church. Welcome to Mountain Views. This afternoon I would like to spend some time contemplating what is involved when it comes to our quest to live a contented life. And in order to get at that, I'd like to read a passage from the Gospel of Luke telling about an encounter Jesus had. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean, but the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." I want to start by telling a story of the only time I went deep sea fishing, which was like 25 years ago. I got on this boat in Cape Cod. You had to pay to get on. There were about 40 people. I made the mistake of going to Burger King shortly before I got on that boat. Within just a matter of minutes, I knew I was getting sick. It was an awful feeling. You have got to have experienced to know what I'm talking about. You probably have some notion. But the feeling was, this is all wrong. Not only was there that awful feeling of being sick and knowing that I was going to throw up, but there are all the levels on top of it of my discontent. There was the sense of self-contempt for having foolishly gone to Burger King before I got on the boat. There was the sense of, why aren't I one of these macho people beside me who can handle this? There was the self of, we wasted this money on this. Not only that, there was embarrassment that I was about to make a fool of myself in the presence of the others. There was also simple fear. Am I going to be able to survive this? It's 4 hours on this boat. All these levels on top of the misery of the sickness. And yet then, about an hour into it, perhaps about the time I began to actually throw up, there was a shift in my experience of being on that boat. It ceased to be terrible. And it had to do with something having to do with accepting my lot. I began to perceive certain blessings, such as how cool it felt to put my fevered brow on the bench as I lay there with the breeze. How nice that felt. I felt a certain camaraderie with one other gentleman on the boat, who otherwise I probably would have had nothing in common, but he too was puking his guts. So he and I felt like brothers. There was this camaraderie together, and the experience shifted. It wasn't exactly fun, but it was okay. Reflecting on that experience, I think about what has evolved recently in the study of what's called positive psychology, or the study of happiness. The study by psychologists of people's perceptions of what will make them happy, or what in fact makes them happy. And it's been interesting, and perhaps they didn't need to make the study in the first place, but could have simply paid attention to things that Jesus said 2,000 years ago. For instance, when he said, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, but to lose his soul?" For instance, you if we were asked which would we prefer happening in our life, on the one hand, situation A, that we were to win the lottery and become extravagantly rich in the blink of an eye, or B, have a serious spinal injury that made it impossible for us hereafter to walk. Well, we would all say, I suspect, hey, give me the lottery. And yet, when the people who study people's perceptions of contentment, of happiness, go to the people who have had the big winning in the lottery and the people who have had the spinal injury a year down the road or further, the remarkable thing is that the people who've won the lottery are not perceiving their life as being any better off than those who've had the spinal cord injury, which is an amazing thing. In fact, if anything, the people who have had the spinal cord injury have a tendency to express more gratification, satisfaction, contentment in their life than those who have more money than they know what to do with. It turns out from their studies that money doesn't have a whole lot to do with a person's perception of being happy. It makes a difference if you're poor, if you don't know where your next meal's coming from, or whether you have a house to live in, or whether you have a doctor to see when you're sick. That's a serious matter, which is, as you can see, the constant theme in the Bible of caring for the poor is a real concern. But once you have enough money to take care of your basic needs, it doesn't much matter whether you have the income of a middle-class person or you're as rich as Bill Gates, and as to whether or not you perceive your life as good, content. And what people also underestimate in our perceptions of what life is about is the profound capacity we have for adaptation to our situations. I was trying to get at that to some degree in my experience on the fishing boat. The worst part of the experience was the things that I was pushing on the experience. And once I was able to accept the experience and let go of those things, where there were blessings that were there that I had not noticed otherwise, might not have experienced otherwise. To have yourself broken, your body broken with a spinal cord injury is a burden that I cannot imagine. But what does seem to be the case is that as time progresses and an acceptance comes of that fate, people in that situation begin to discern more clearly what life is about. They adapt, and there are blessings, and they are connected to what really matters in life. Now, to go back to the story of the 10 lepers, if you had asked people in those days, what is the worst possible fate to afflict a person with, high up on the list for most people would have been to contract leprosy, not only because of the pain and the risk of death that leprosy could involve, but even more so because of the social isolation that it brought upon a person. It rendered them unclean, which meant they had to leave the village, leave their family, leave their friends, go and live outside of the community as an outcast. And that kind of isolation was the deep burden. And you've asked people, well, what was the worst possible thing? Well, it's come down with leprosy. And yet, there is a capacity for adaptation, which in those days would have meant that for a person to come down with leprosy after they went through that initial horror, they would have begun to adapt, as is human nature. And outside of the villages where the lepers all came, a little leper community would evolve. And in this particular instance, it was a community of lepers who were both Samaritan and Jewish. So they are experiencing the unusual experience of discovering that they share a common humanity with these people that previously they thought they had nothing in common with, which is a blessing. And also in that case, because the Torah said there was an obligation for people to care for lepers, it meant that somebody suffering from leprosy outside of the community would pretty well depend upon that they were not starved to death, because there was almsgiving that was obligatory, and so there would be food provided for them. So here are these lepers outside of the community, and in some sense they've adapted. It's a harsh life, but they're living there in community. And Jesus comes along, whether or not they are expecting a healing from him or simply are looking for yet another handout. They cry to him. Jesus says, "Go to the priest and show yourself." In obedience, all 10 go. And as they are going, all of them discover that they have been healed of their leprosy. And as you know, one of them turns back and goes to Jesus and gives thanks and revels in the moment. There's a certain way in which you can see this story as a first century survey of people's perception of their life as a blessing or a burden, whether they're content. And that in some sense, 9 out of 10 did not see it as a blessing. This may seem strange to us, but if you think in terms of they have adapted to their life and they have been healed, what it meant was there's a whole new set of problems to be faced. They are no longer lepers who can rely on charity to eat. They have to go back to the villages. They have to leave the community that they have been living out of and go back, and there's a whole set of problems. Will they find the love that they left? Will there still be the work for them? All kinds of problems they got to go face. And apparently, 9 out of 10, when they saw that they had been set free of their affliction, did not give themselves time to rejoice in that. They went immediately on to the next problem, of which there would be no end of problems. Only one comes back and gives praise to God and thanks Jesus. And Jesus makes that statement about your faith has made you whole, implying that wholeness is more than simply having your skin disease delivered, that it has to do with a state of mind, of heart, of being able to be content with what you've been given. And that there is something about human nature that makes it real hard for us in this world to experience the contentedness that God intends for us to know in our life. So in conclusion, I just want to summarize some of the lessons that are in this story about what's involved in living a contented life, since I think many of us, if we're pressed, would say, I don't experience my life contentedly. The first thing is learning the secret of enough. We live in a culture where we are pressed by the whole free enterprise system to perpetually want more. How much is enough? And to be able to say, this is enough, and to not fall into the compulsion that I must have more. That everybody would just assume I would be happier if I had more, but it's not true. To learn the secret of enough. The second thing, in terms of living a contented life, kindness and community are really essential. Jesus stopping to help these people in need. The community in which they helped one another. This isn't just extra. This is the essence of what it means to live a life that is lived as a blessing, to be actively engaged in offering kindness, of serving, of caring for one another, to be a part of a community of people who care for one another isn't just an extra, it's a necessity. And in our day and age, too often we rely strictly on our families for that kind of caring, and that is inadequate. You need the church, you need the larger community to be a part of. And also just that basic lesson of don't be in such a hurry. The 9 healed lepers are in a hurry to get on to the next task. When you're in a hurry, you cannot experience your life as a blessing. You cannot see you are blessed. Somebody said that hurry isn't of the devil, it is the devil. That it is the dark one's strategy is to keep us in such a hurry that we can't experience blessing, contentedness. Slow down. And finally, to recognize that there is a certain sense in which there is an act of will involved in gratitude. To stop and take the time to name your blessings. People have experienced shifts in their life by being able to putting into a practice, a simple practice of daily naming blessings. To slow down and to ask yourself as you go to bed at night perhaps, how was I blessed this day? Concrete ways that you received a gift. And to tarry long enough to acknowledge that was a gift. That act of kindness from a friend, that phone call, that good dinner, that moment of seeing beauty was a blessing. And to tarry over it, which is what that one Samaritan leper did. And to recognize those moments in particular where the walls come down and you can see we are all connected, and to be able to name those moments and embrace them. I challenge you to think about doing this for the coming week, just a little practical exercise. Every night before you go to bed, write 3 good things that happened to you in your day. Write it down in a little book. Do this for a whole week and see whether that there isn't a shift for you, how you're perceiving your life. God bless you. I am Pastor Jeff Edwards of the Parsippany United Methodist Church, and it has been a joy to be here today. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to Mountain Views. I'm Dan Agatino, your host. Joining us in studio today is Pastor Edwards.
Hi, Dan.
Thanks for coming again.
Good to be here.
Great message, talking about happiness. We all want to be happy.
Happiness, yeah. Happiness is what is used in the psychology of positive psychology. I tried to use the word contentedness more often because I think there is baggage often with the cultural understandings of happiness, and that as Christians we're not necessarily called to be happy, we are called to be joyful, we are called to be content. But in terms of the way the culture thinks about happiness, sometimes yes, sometimes no, I think. So happiness seems to be pretty much something where you've got everything working in your favor, and life isn't always in that. Life doesn't always work in our favor in that way. So how can you be content? As Paul said, I know how to be content when things are good and things are bad.
How is that not kind of a stoicism? If it's raining, okay. If it's sunny, okay. Because we've talked previously about you got to be passionate.
That's right. It's a good question. And everything we say ends up maybe being in counterbalancing what we have previously said. But that sense of realizing how much misery we impose upon ourselves that isn't related so much to the event itself, but to what we're doing to ourselves in the event. And that's how I used the experience of my being seasick, that the worst part of the experience was my interpretation of the experience, and once I could kind of let that go, it wasn't as bad. It was okay. It was, and what is involved in life in making that shift wherever we are to, okay, this is where life has led me. This is where God has brought me. Where do I find the blessing in this, rather than putting all my energy into ranting about how this is all wrong, which is what I think does us in.
and you said, here's some practical techniques. Don't be in a hurry. Be kind to others. Engage with your community.
Yeah.
Be self-reflective.
Learn the secret of enough.
Let's talk about enough.
Yeah. Because I think the culture does consciously want to keep us from that. Because in some ways, the whole purpose of all those advertisements we watch is to lead us to think we don't have enough. And it's a countercultural move on our part to say it's enough. Because the culture wants us in a frenzy, panting after what it has to offer.
You went further than the culture. Said there may be others who want us in a frenzy.
The darkness that opposes God's light, the devil, the evil one. Yeah, I think there is a conspiracy to keep us in a hurry so that we don't ponder the blessing.
You said that one way that's practical for individuals to ponder the blessing is at night, before you go to bed, just jot down 3 things.
Yeah, for me, that it may be different for every person, but for me, at night is when I can best do that, to ponder the day that has just been, and to recognize what went well, and like the 10th leper, to be there in celebrating that rather than let it pass us by without owning it.
If we did that and we had a list from every week of the year and we showed, well, this is what went well today, do you think that what we wrote down might tell something about our beliefs and values of what's important to us? Whether I wrote down, okay, I made some money today, or okay,
right,
something.
Right, so yes, you would find yourself asking, well, what sort of things endure? What kind of blessings come through consistently? You know, if we're tied up with, I'm doing well monetarily, we find ourselves in a recession, well, we may not be writing too often that, well, I had a good day in the stock market. But there are simple acts of kindness and simple acts of beauty that are there regardless of whether the economy is going up or down. And that's the kind of thing perhaps you would hopefully begin to attend to as you put this into practice. Because those things exist apart from money. And money has a way of controlling us in this culture.
I had once heard a quote of somebody saying that may God reduce you to tears on Judgment Day for the poems you failed to write that ought to have been yours. That seems to be something you're sharing in this message and in the previous message, that we have opportunities that we're not taking advantage of because we might not now see the value in it, but it is valuable.
Right. I remember hearing some little anecdote of some very famous man of a couple of centuries back who in his journal wrote something to the effect of, I spent my day spent with my son, a total waste of a day. And he happened to have the journal of the son from that day as well, who said, what a great day it was. I spent the day with my dad. And from the dad's point of view, he wasn't out there conquering the world, but he was spending time with his son. And the tragedy that we can often be blind to those kinds of blessings because they don't have a price tag on them. We don't get an award for conquering the world with it. But
why is it we know this? You preach about it. We could read about it.
We know it, don't we? But we forget it.
I'm thinking that there's a novel, Death of Ivan Ilyich. Guy just did what he was supposed to do. Went, got a job, had a family, and he's on his deathbed and he's reflecting on what you're saying. Just, wow, he shouldn't have been just going to work every day and doing what society expects.
Yeah.
But why do we forget it? Why? I mean, the scriptures couldn't be more clear. The Gospels don't only say it, but Jesus' life testifies to this idea that is expressed in the parable, no, in the story of the lepers.
Well, I think Because it's not the norm. The kind of holiness that Jesus and people who are, quote unquote, sanctified or moving in that direction is not the norm. What is the norm is to be caught up in this world. And so to experience that almost seems as though it's unreal, it's impractical. But on another level, it is the most practical thing in the world to ponder the blessing and to be grateful. But it's not the norm. And so it becomes who do we look for to define what normal is? Do we look to Jesus, or do we to the advertising agencies that want to hold us captive?
The one who returned to thank Jesus was a Samaritan.
Right.
And Jesus said, "You're a foreigner and you came to me." Those who were supposed to be, in theory, closer,
right,
didn't come to say thanks. I mean, I could come up with defenses, and I'm sure you could too. Jesus said, "Go to the priest." They were going to the priest.
Right, and that's an interesting part of the question. In some sense, the one is the one who disobeyed Jesus, because the other are being dutiful, doing exactly what they were told.
I mean, could you imagine the fear in the minds of somebody just healed me, and they told me I ought to do something, so I'm going to go do it, because I don't want to go back to where I was. And yet this person didn't have any time for that sort of contemplation, rationalization, whatever
right.
word it is. I'm going back to thank the man.
Yeah.
Perhaps he knew the God who saved me.
Right.
In disobedience to his command, go and show yourself to the priest.
That is a fascinating aspect of this. And it seems, as I referenced in a previous sermon, there are only a handful of places in the Gospels where individuals are referred to as manifesting faith. And this is one of those instances, the Samaritan. And all the other ones, the people who embody it have a quality of rebellion about them. The woman with the flow of blood for 12 years who comes to Jesus to touch the hem of his garment, she has to break through the social mores and the religious law that say you should not be out here with these people in these conditions. But she follows this leading within her of the Spirit that takes her to Jesus that defies the cultural expectations. And there's a strange way in which the Samaritan's doing the same thing.
We're nearly out of time, which is unfortunate, because we could have a rich conversation about faith as disobedience.
Faith as making a stink sometimes, you know, as owning that birthright that says, my daddy has called me to live as a child of the kingdom, and that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you for helping to remind us about that.
Thank you, Dan.
And thank you for tuning into Mountain Views. I'm Dan Agatino, your host.